Hello, class and Dr. Sabbath. Welcome to my visual presentation. As you can see, it is about disabilities in regards to family stress. I hope the quality of all this is good, and I hope you're able to hear me okay and make out all the pictures and stuff okay. So let's get into it. So before I get into the actual presentation, I just want to touch on why this is important. Chances are all of us know of a family member or a friend of a family who might be considered family who has a disability, so it's good to know these kind of things so you can relate to them. And additionally, the topic is a little taboo, so there's a large amount of misinformation or unacceptance in the public consciousness, so it's good to just be aware and to educate yourself on these matters. And also, as you'll see later in the presentation, dealing and coping with a family member's disability can strengthen familial relationships, communication, and can teach you all sorts of things like patience or love, acceptance, and courage. So as it relates to the figure 10.1 in our textbook, the disability would fit into the individual and intermediate family levels. Individual is a bit more obvious because it deals with genetic makeup, abilities, and disabilities. And intermediate family because the disability of one family member often affects the rest of the intermediate family because they have to change some of their things in their lives to cope and accommodate that member with the disability. Mapping the stress on the horizontal levels, you can see it goes under developmental or unpredictable stressors. Developmental because it deals with genetic development, thus fitting under that category. And for unpredictable, sometimes the disability will be the result of a freak accident or injury that families are unable to predict or account for. So with coping, families who have a member that has been diagnosed with a disability will confront the need for a meaningful coping process. And the coping process can involve major adjustments in physical or emotional energy, but this energy in no way equals the long-term drain on the family's resources, as well as the family's energies required to help deal with that affected family member. Additionally, the coping process that families go through, it's very similar to the coping process when dealing with the death of a loved one. And the process includes 5 stages, as you can see: impact, denial, grief, focusing outward, and closure. So focusing on the first of these stages, which is impact, on this stage the family members will learn of the disability or the condition, and this stage is characterized by them feeling anxiety and tension. Those emotions are most prevalent during this stage. The family will also respond in a disorganized manner and can absorb very little information since this impact is often kind of comes out of the blue and can be unpredictable at times. And family members will often be asking themselves questions like, why was it my child or spouse, parent, or sibling that was diagnosed with this? Or why would they be singled out by God in an attempt to sort of make sense of this diagnosis? The second stage, as you can see here, is denial. In this stage, the family members could experience a sense of disbelief about the diagnosis and distorted expectations as to how that family member with the disability what their future will look like, what the family's future will look like, what their specific role in the family will look like, and how that might change. And oftentimes, like it says, these are very distorted. In this stage, also, family members may reject the diagnosis, finding themselves unable to hear what others are saying about the problem, just rejecting the diagnosis entirely and refusing to learn anything about it. And effective communication really suffers in this stage, as family members may refuse to discuss the disability or even acknowledge it at all. The third stage is grief, which is characterized by anger or sadness, and there's lots of questioning and blaming during this stage where family members are trying desperately to find a reason why their family member was diagnosed with a disability, trying to find a scapegoat or some reason that they can comprehend why this happened to a loved one of theirs. In this stage, also, family members may isolate themselves from friends or family, and this prevents open and supportive communication that they really need during this time. So you can see that grief, like denial, communication really suffers in these 2 stages. So in this stage, we're starting to be more positive and trending upward as the family members will start to communicate more and communicate better by seeking information, discussing options, asking for help, expressing their feelings about their family member's diagnosis, as well as forming support groups or joining support groups. And as you can see, communication does improve as members become more active and productive. All right, the last stage is closure. And this is a stage when the family has a reconciliation with reality, in the sense that those distorted expectations from the denial stage are all gone, and they have a clear vision of how they will be helping their family member who has been diagnosed with a disability, what their life will be like, what the member with the disability's life will be like. Also in the stage, the family adapts to that disabled member's needs, and they pull together, adjusting in a way that allows members of the altered system to move forward and to communicate directly about concerns. So the family members that are not the ones with a disability, they'll be moving forward knowing what their new roles are, and they'll feel comfortable communicating concerns about their roles or just life in general. So the book mentions that this coping process can take up to 2 years for a family to complete from the first stage to the last stage. And obviously, this depends on the severity of the disability that the family member has been diagnosed with, as well as how well that family is at adapting and responding and communicating to stress like this. Interestingly, grandparents and older members of the family are often left out of this coping process. The book mentions that they do not get the same help when coping with a family member's disability, and unfortunately, they're often left to deal with these feelings alone. In addition to older members of the family, the siblings of the family member who has a disability will also sometimes be left out of the coping process. The book mentions they may have a surprising lack of information about the disability, and this lack of information, essentially a failure in communication, can lead them to be very confused, not only about the disability, the diagnosis, but life moving forward as well. Furthermore, the siblings may feel responsible for the condition. They may wonder if they're susceptible to it. They'll be experiencing lots of confusion about how to talk about it with others, if they should be talking about it with others at all. And they'll be feeling overwhelmed by a bunch of emotions like anger, hurt, or guilt. However, there are positives that can come out of this situation. So the book refers to a study done with the siblings of people with Down syndrome, and it revealed that they had above average self concepts and were socially competent and had low numbers of behavior problems. And these siblings also stated that they had learned patience, love, and courage from their siblings with Down syndrome. So you can see that there really are a lot of positive effects that can come out of these coping stages. For the parents of a disabled child, there's sadly a high divorce rate among people who have children that have been diagnosed with disabilities, and this can be traced back to the communication shortcomings in the denial and grief stages, where couples will not want to talk to each other and not know how to talk to each other and just isolate themselves, and thus the relationship will suffer. Although that these negative effects are prevalent, and like I said before, they're born out of communication shortcomings, there are marriages and just relationships between couples or partners that can really strengthen as a result of going through these coping stages together and being effective in their communication, which leads to a lot of positives as a result of their child being diagnosed with a disability. So I wanted to use the Keller family here as a example of how a marriage can be strengthened or enriched by having a child with a disability. The Keller family are kind of celebrities. They've been featured on the television program Born This Way, which is about how people who've been diagnosed with Down syndrome are functioning and gaining independence in today's world, and how their relationship with their parents have changed over time. I refer to an interview that the mother Amy did with this clothing brand, Little Warrior, where she mentions how her son Rocco, who has been diagnosed with Down syndrome, is the biggest blessing the family has received, and how they've given their family so much love and filled this void in their hearts that they didn't know existed. So this excerpt here from the interview, I believe, really touches upon many of the aforementioned stages of coping and is a great example of how the parents of a disabled child can really come together and make something positive out of the experience and have their marriage or their relationship really be enriched by co-parenting a child with a disability and not ending up in a divorce or anything like that. I won't read the entire quote here. I don't want to bore any of you, but I would encourage you all to pause the video and read it yourselves. Like I said, it really goes to show how having a child with a disability doesn't always mean that a marriage or a relationship has to end in divorce or something negative, but can be turned into a big positive. So, similar to how growing up with a sibling that has been diagnosed with a disability can lead to a lot of positives and can be a very enriching learning experience, growing up with a disabled parent similarly can also lead to a lot of positives and can be a very enriching learning experience. I reference here research that was done at a university in Israel that found that school-aged children and adolescents who had parents with disabilities ranked higher in certain emotional skills compared to children whose parents had not been diagnosed with disabilities. This study also mentions that the relationship between the child and their parent who has been diagnosed with a disability is very unique, and they refer to it as mutual comprehension, which is a very fancy way of saying empathy, and the fact that the child can have empathy for their parent in the disability with the disability they have, and the parent can have empathy for the child and how the child has to change some of their life around to help the parent. And this quote I have here really exemplifies this. The quote is saying that the mutual comprehension allows parents to accept their child's assistance and the child to take upon unique responsibilities in helping the parent with maybe transportation, or if the parent was blind, literally serving as their eyes. And this bolsters the child's empathy, and the child's emotional literacy. I just wanted to end here with some takeaways that I hope you can glean from this presentation. The first of which is that families with disabled children who are able to communicate effectively by reframing the situation as a learning experience are able to function a lot more effectively in not only helping the child live a fulfilled life, but the family itself learning more and being more positive. The second point here is probably pretty obvious to all of us being communication studies majors, but the more support a parent receives in coping with this child and the more open those channels of communication are, again, not breaking down in the grief and denial stages, the more positive and beneficial the life of the disabled child will be, but also the experience that the members in the family have in coping and in moving forward. And then lastly here, again, probably obvious for us comm studies majors, but the stress that can come from a family having a family member who's being diagnosed with a disability really can become a positive when communication is effective and doesn't break down, and the family can adapt well and reframe the situation as a learning experience. So here are my citations. Obviously, I used the book. The second one here is from that study from Israel, and the third one here is about the Keller family and their son Rocco. So thank you all for listening to the presentation, and I hope you all are staying safe and healthy during this time.